The stagecoach lurched to a violent stop in front of the weathered ranch house, and Willa Newman's heart hammered as she glimpsed the tall figure waiting on the porch, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the Montana sunset like something carved from the mountains themselves. She had traveled over 800 miles from St. Louis to answer an advertisement for a nanny position, leaving behind a city choked with memories of her deceased parents and a failed engagement to a banker who chose his career over their future. At 22 years old, Willa carried only 2 carpetbags, a well-worn copy of poetry, and a determination to build something meaningful from the ruins of her previous life. Montana Territory in 1878 represented possibility, even if that possibility came wrapped in dust and uncertainty. The driver opened the door, and Willa stepped down, her practical gray traveling dress already coated with trail dust. The man on the porch descended the steps with measured strides, his boots heavy on the wooden planks. He was perhaps 30 years old, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of winter frost. His face bore the weathered look of a man who spent his days under an unforgiving sun, but there was something gentle in the way he removed his hat when he reached her. "Miss Newman." His voice carried a rough warmth like whiskey poured over gravel. "Yes, Mr. Armstrong, I presume, Zachary Armstrong." He extended a calloused hand, and when she placed hers in it, his grip was firm but careful. "Welcome to the Double A Ranch. I hope the journey was not too difficult. It was long, but I have arrived safely, and that is what matters." Willa withdrew her hand, suddenly conscious of how small and pale it looked against his sun-bronzed skin. Zachary grabbed her bags before she could protest. "The children are inside. I should warn you, they have been through 3 nannies in the past year. My daughter Emma is 8 and my son Daniel is 5. They are good children, Miss Newman, but they have been hurting since their mother passed." The pain in his voice made Willa's chest tighten. "How long has it been?" 14 months. He started toward the house and she followed. Scarlet fever took her quick. 1 week she was laughing at the supper table and the next she was gone. The children have not been the same since. The house was larger than Willa expected. A solid 2-story structure built from lodgepole pine with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Through the windows, she could see warm lamplight, and for a moment, homesickness pierced her resolve. This would be her home now, at least for the foreseeable future. Inside, the house smelled of wood smoke and something burning. Zachary cursed under his breath and hurried toward the kitchen, dropping her bags by the door. Willa followed to find a thin woman in her 60s waving a dish towel at a smoking pan, while 2 children watched from the doorway with expressions caught between amusement and alarm. "Mrs. Henderson, I told you not to attempt the stove," Zachary said, taking the pan and carrying it outside. "I was just trying to make the children some supper," the older woman said, looking flustered. "But this contraption has a mind of its own. This is Miss Newman, the new nanny." Zachary returned, opening windows to clear the smoke. "Miss Newman, this is Mrs. Henderson, who helps with the washing and mending." Willa smiled at the older woman, then turned her attention to the children. The girl, Emma, had her father's dark hair but lighter eyes, somewhere between blue and gray. She stood with her arms crossed, her expression guarded. The boy, Daniel, had lighter hair and his mother's features, Willa supposed, with a scattering of freckles across his nose. He peered at her from behind his sister with open curiosity. "Hello, Emma. Hello, Daniel. I am very pleased to meet you both." Willa crouched down to their eye level, something she had learned from helping in her church's Sunday school back in St. Louis. "I have traveled a very long way to be here, and I hope we can become good friends." Emma's expression did not change. "Our last nanny said that too." Then she left after Papa's prize bull chased her into the creek. Emma, that is enough, Zachary said, but there was no real heat in his tone. Did the bull catch her? Willa asked, keeping her voice light. Daniel giggled, and Emma's lips twitched almost into a smile. No, but she got all wet and muddy, and she screamed so loud the chickens did not lay eggs for a week. Well, I shall have to remember to stay clear of the prize bull, Willa said seriously. Though I must confess, I have never actually seen a real bull before, only milk cows. You have never seen a bull? Daniel's eyes widened. They are really big and scary. Then I am fortunate to have you both here to teach me about ranch life. Willa stood, brushing off her skirt. But first, perhaps I could prepare some supper. I notice you are all likely quite hungry. Zachary looked at her with surprise. You cook? My mother taught me, and after she passed, I kept house for my father until his death last year. I can promise you it will not burn. She glanced at the stove with an assessing eye. Though I will need to familiarize myself with your kitchen. Mrs. Henderson looked relieved. Bless you, dear. I will show you where everything is kept. Mr. Armstrong, why do you not get Miss Newman settled in her room while I give the children some bread and butter to tide them over? An hour later, Willa had unpacked her few belongings in a small but comfortable room on the second floor, changed into a simpler dress, and stood in the kitchen assessing the available ingredients. She found flour, eggs, potatoes, onions, a side of bacon, and some herbs growing in pots on the windowsill. It was not much, but it was enough. By the time the sun had fully set, she had produced a meal of fried potatoes with onions, scrambled eggs with cheese, bacon, and biscuits that actually rose properly. The family gathered around the large wooden table in the dining room, and Willa served the food while trying not to feel self-conscious under Zachary's steady gaze. This looks wonderful, Miss Newman, he said, and when he took the first bite, something in his expression softened. It tastes even better. My mama made biscuits like this, Daniel said around a mouthful, earning a sharp look from his sister. Do not talk with your mouth full, Emma said, but her own plate was already half empty. After supper, Willa helped the children prepare for bed, a process that involved considerable negotiation about the necessity of washing faces and hands. Emma maintained her guarded demeanor, but Daniel chattered freely about the ranch, his pony, the new kittens in the barn, and approximately 17 other topics that jumped around like grasshoppers. When both children were finally tucked into their beds, Willa descended the stairs to find Zachary sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, going over a ledger by lamplight. He looked up when she entered, and the exhaustion in his eyes made him look older than his years. They settled down well, she reported. Daniel wanted 3 different stories before he would agree to sleep, and Emma insisted on checking under her bed for snakes. There are no snakes in the house. Zachary rubbed his face with one hand. That is just something she does. She has been having nightmares since her mother passed. Willa poured herself a cup of coffee without asking permission, then sat down across from him. It is natural for children to fear the dark after experiencing loss. The world has proven itself to be unpredictable and dangerous. Checking for snakes gives her some sense of control. He studied her for a long moment. You are younger than I expected. The other nannies were all older women. Does my age concern you? I am not certain yet. He closed the ledger. The children need stability, Miss Newman. They need someone who will stay, not someone who will run off the first time ranch life proves difficult. I have nowhere to run to, Willa said simply. My parents are both dead, I have no siblings, and I dissolved my engagement before leaving St. Louis. This position represents a fresh start for me, Mr. Armstrong. I have no intention of abandoning it at the first sign of difficulty. What happened with your engagement, if you do not mind my asking? He loved his position at the bank more than he loved me. The words came out more bitter than she intended. When his employer suggested he might advance more quickly if he married the employer's daughter instead, he did not hesitate. I realized I had been fooling myself about the depth of his affection. Zachary's jaw tightened. Then he was a fool. The quiet conviction in his voice made heat rise in her cheeks. That is kind of you to say. It is not kindness, it is fact. He stood, carrying his cup to the wash basin. Your room is comfortable, very much so, thank you. Good. The children usually wake around 6. Emma is old enough to dress herself, but Daniel still needs help with his buttons. After breakfast, Emma has lessons. She can read well, but her arithmetic needs work. Daniel should be learning his letters. I can teach them. Willa rose as well. I assisted the schoolmaster in St. Louis for a time. What about their midday meal? I come in from the range around noon. We eat together. He paused, his hand on the door frame. Miss Newman, I want you to understand something. Those children are the most important thing in my life. Everything I do, every decision I make is for them. If you hurt them or fail them, I will not be understanding about it. I would expect nothing less, Mr. Armstrong. She met his gaze steadily. I give you my word that I will do everything in my power to care for your children as if they were my own. Something shifted in his expression, a subtle easing of the tension in his shoulders. Then, I will bid you good night. After he left, Willa stood in the quiet kitchen, listening to the house settle around her. Through the window, she could see the vast expanse of Montana sky, scattered with more stars than she had ever imagined existed. The prairie stretched out in all directions, empty and wild and beautiful in a way that made her chest ache. She had come here expecting to care for children and nothing more. But standing in that kitchen, she realized she had walked into something far more complicated. A grieving family, a lonely widower, and 2 children who needed more than just supervision. They needed someone to help them remember how to be whole again. The first week passed in a blur of activity. Willa rose before dawn to prepare breakfast, got the children fed and dressed, led them through their lessons, prepared meals, tidied the house, and fell into bed each night too exhausted to think. Emma remained distant, watching Willa with suspicious eyes, though she completed her lessons without complaint. Daniel attached himself to Willa immediately, following her around the house and chattering endlessly about everything and nothing. Zachary was gone most days, riding out at sunrise to manage the ranch with his small crew of ranch hands. The double ran about 500 head of cattle across several thousand acres, and between checking fences, moving herds, treating sick animals, and managing the business side of the operation, he rarely had a free moment. But he always came in for the noon meal, and he always spent the hour before the children's bedtime with them. No matter how tired he looked, Willa found herself watching for his arrival each day, listening for the sound of his boots on the porch. He was unfailingly polite, but maintained a careful distance, never lingering to talk with her beyond what was necessary for the children's care. She told herself it was appropriate and professional, even as she noticed the way lamplight caught the silver beginning to thread through his dark hair, or how his rare smiles transformed his entire face. On Sunday, they all dressed for church and rode into the nearest town, a small settlement called Willow Creek about 8 miles from the ranch. The church was a simple wooden building that also served as the schoolhouse, and it seemed the entire community had turned out for services. Willa felt dozens of curious eyes examining her as she took her place in the pew beside Emma, with Daniel squeezed between her and his father. After the service, she was surrounded by welcoming women eager to introduce themselves and satisfy their curiosity about the new nanny. Mrs. Patterson, the minister's wife, was particularly friendly, inviting them all to supper the following week. Several unmarried men also found reasons to speak with Zachary, their eyes straying to Willa with obvious interest. "You have made quite an impression," Zachary said dryly as they loaded back into the wagon for the journey home. "I expect you will receive several callers in the coming weeks. I am not interested in callers." Willa settled her skirts, keeping her voice light. "I came here to care for your children, not to seek a husband. Nevertheless, you should know that unmarried women are scarce in Montana territory. The men will be persistent. Then they will be disappointed." She glanced at him, but his expression was unreadable beneath the brim of his hat. That afternoon, while Zachary was doing paperwork and the children were supposed to be napping, Willa decided to explore the area around the house. She had been so busy she had barely stepped outside except to hang washing or gather eggs from the chicken coop. Now, with a rare hour of freedom, she walked toward the large barn, curious about the animals she had heard so much about from Daniel. The barn was dim and cool, smelling of hay and horse and leather. She could hear animals moving in their stalls, and somewhere above, barn swallows chirped from their nests in the rafters. She was admiring a beautiful Palomino mare when a voice behind her made her jump. "That is Buttercup. She was my wife's horse." Willa turned to find Zachary standing in the barn doorway, his large frame backlit by the afternoon sun. "I apologize. I should have asked permission before exploring. You are welcome anywhere on the ranch, Miss Newman." He moved closer, reaching up to stroke the mare's nose. Grace loved this horse. She would ride out across the prairie for hours, just her and Buttercup in the sky. After she died, I could not bring myself to sell her, even though she eats more than she is worth. "She is beautiful," Willa said softly. "Your wife must have been an excellent rider." "She was fearless." His voice carried a mixture of admiration and pain. Grace never met a challenge she would not tackle head-on. She was born in Montana, the daughter of a trapper and a Crow woman. She could shoot better than most men, rope a steer, and outride anyone in the territory. When she agreed to marry me, I felt like the luckiest man alive. Willa heard the love in his voice and felt an unexpected pang of something that might have been jealousy. "She sounds remarkable." She was. He continued stroking the horse, his eyes distant, but she was also stubborn and reckless. When the fever came, she refused to rest, insisted on doing her chores. By the time I convinced her to stay in bed, it was too late. The doctor said if she had rested from the beginning, she might have survived. You cannot blame yourself for her choices. I am her husband. I should have made her rest. The muscles in his jaw clenched. I should have protected her. From an illness. Mr. Armstrong, that is not reasonable. He turned to look at her then, and the raw grief in his eyes made her breath catch. "Reasonable or not, Miss Newman, I failed her. I will not fail my children." Before she could respond, Daniel's voice called from outside. "Papa, Papa, come quick. Emma is stuck in the tree again." Zachary closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them, the vulnerable moment had passed. "That girl will be the death of me." They found Emma about 15 feet up in a cottonwood tree near the creek, her dress caught on a branch, and her face set in stubborn lines that reminded Willa strongly of her father. Daniel stood at the base of the tree, looking worried. "Emma Grace Armstrong, what did I tell you about climbing trees in your Sunday dress?" Zachary called up. "You said not to," Emma replied, not quite meeting his eyes. "But I had to rescue Mittens." "Mittens?" Willa looked around. "Where is the cat?" She already climbed down. Emma's face flushed. "I guess she did not really need rescuing after all." Zachary sighed heavily. "Hold still. I am coming up. I can get down myself," Emma protested, but her voice wobbled slightly. "I just need to unhook my dress." You are 15 feet in the air, and if you fall, you will break your neck." Zachary grabbed the lowest branch and hauled himself up with practiced ease. "Stay still." Willa watched, her heart in her throat, as he climbed up to his daughter. When he reached her, he carefully untangled her dress from the branch, then guided her down, branch by branch, until they both reached the ground safely. Emma immediately ran to Daniel, who hugged her tightly. "That was scary," he said into her shoulder. "I thought you were going to fall." "I was not scared," Emma lied, but she did not pull away from her brother's embrace. Zachary turned to Willa, and she was surprised to see a slight smile playing at his lips. "Welcome to life on the Double-A Ranch, Miss Newman. There is never a dull moment, so I am beginning to understand." She looked at Emma, who was now trying to appear nonchalant. "Though I must say, if you are going to rescue cats from trees, you might want to change out of your Sunday dress first." Emma's eyes widened slightly, and Willa realized the girl had expected punishment, not practical advice. "I probably should have thought of that." "Probably," Willa agreed. "Perhaps next time you could ask for help before climbing 15 feet in the air, maybe." Emma's tone suggested this was unlikely. That evening, after the children were in bed, Willa found Zachary on the front porch, sitting in one of the weathered rocking chairs and staring out at the darkening prairie. She hesitated, uncertain whether he wanted company, but then he glanced over and gestured to the other chair. "Cannot sleep?" he asked. "I am still adjusting to the quiet. In St. Louis there was always noise. Wagons on the streets, people talking, dogs barking. Here the silence feels almost alive." She sat down, folding her hands in her lap. "It is strange, but not unpleasant. I grew up in Philadelphia. When I first came west, the silence nearly drove me mad." He continued, rocking slowly. "Now I cannot imagine living anywhere else. The city feels suffocating when I visit." "What brought you to Montana?" "Ambition, initially. I wanted to build something of my own, not work in my father's textile mill for the rest of my life." His lips quirked. "My family thought I was insane. They still do, probably. We exchange letters twice a year, and each one from my mother contains at least one paragraph urging me to come home and rejoin civilized society. Do you miss Philadelphia? I miss my family sometimes, but this is home now." He gestured at the vast expanse before them. "Grace and I built this ranch from nothing. When I first arrived in Montana, I had $200, a horse, and a lot of foolish confidence. I met Grace at a trading post where she was arguing with a fur trader who was trying to cheat her father. She had the man backed against a wall, his own knife at his throat, demanding fair payment." Willa could not help but smile at the image. "That must have been quite an introduction." "I was terrified and fascinated in equal measure." His voice softened with memory. "She was the most alive person I had ever met. Marrying her felt like catching lightning in a bottle. These past 14 months without her have been the longest of my life." The pain in his voice made Willa's chest ache. "Your children are fortunate to have a father who loves them so deeply. Some days I feel like I am failing them." He stopped rocking, his hands gripping the chair arms. "Emma has nightmares almost every night. Daniel still asks when his mama is coming home, and I have no idea what to tell them that will make any of this better." "You tell them the truth," Willa said gently. "That their mother loved them very much, and that even though she is gone, that love remains. That grief is natural and necessary, and that feeling sad does not mean they are doing something wrong. You sound like you speak from experience." "My mother died when I was 16. The grief was overwhelming. I thought I would drown in it." She looked out at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "But my father told me that grief is love with nowhere to go. That helped somehow." Knowing that the pain came from love made it more bearable. Zachary was quiet for a long moment. "Your father sounds like he was a wise man." "He was. I miss him every day." She glanced over and found Zachary watching her with an expression she could not quite interpret. But life continues, even when we wish it would pause long enough for us to catch our breath. We adapt. We find new purposes, new reasons to keep moving forward. Is that what you are doing here, finding a new purpose? Perhaps. She met his gaze steadily. Or perhaps I am simply trying to be useful to people who need help. Either way, I am glad I came. So am I, he said quietly, and something in his tone made warmth bloom in her chest. They sat together in companionable silence as full darkness fell, and the stars emerged in their thousands, scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. Willa found herself acutely aware of Zachary's presence beside her, the quiet strength he radiated, the way the moonlight caught the planes of his face. This was dangerous, she knew. She was the nanny, nothing more. Allowing herself to develop feelings for her employer would be foolish and unprofessional. But as they sat together in the Montana night, she could not quite convince her heart to listen to reason. The following weeks brought a gradual shift in the household dynamics. Emma slowly began to thaw toward Willa, particularly after Willa started teaching her to bake bread and shared her own mother's recipe for cinnamon rolls. Daniel remained his affectionate self, though he occasionally tested boundaries, like the morning he decided to bring a garter snake into the house to show Willa, causing Mrs. Henderson to nearly faint. Willa found herself falling into the rhythms of ranch life with surprising ease. She learned to gather eggs without getting pecked, to pump water from the well, to judge the temperature of the stove by holding her hand near the surface. She discovered she enjoyed the physical work, the sense of accomplishment that came from tangible tasks completed well. Zachary continued to maintain his polite distance, though Willa occasionally caught him watching her with an expression that made her pulse quicken. He was unfailingly respectful, always addressing her as Miss Newman, never touching her except in the most accidental ways, like when their hands brushed passing plates at the supper table. But there were moments when the careful distance wavered. Like the afternoon Willa was struggling to lift a heavy basket of wet washing, and Zachary appeared out of nowhere to take it from her hands, his fingers warm where they overlapped hers. Or the evening she sang the children to sleep, an old lullaby her mother had sung, and she turned to find Zachary standing in the doorway, his eyes suspiciously bright. One Saturday, about 6 weeks after her arrival, Zachary announced at breakfast that he needed to ride into Willow Creek for supplies and asked if Willa and the children wanted to accompany him. The children agreed enthusiastically, and Willa found herself looking forward to the outing more than she probably should. The ride into town was pleasant, the late summer weather warm but not oppressive. Daniel sat between Willa and Zachary on the wagon bench, chattering happily while Emma sat in the back, her legs dangling off the edge. Willa tried not to be too conscious of how close Zachary's thigh was to hers on the narrow bench, or how his arm occasionally brushed against her when he worked the reins. Willow Creek was busier than it had been on Sunday, with ranchers and farmers coming in to trade and purchase supplies. Zachary stopped the wagon in front of the general store and helped Willa down, his hands spanning her waist for a brief moment that left her slightly breathless. "I need to speak with the bank manager and the feed supplier," he said, settling his hat more firmly. "That should take about an hour. Will you be all right with the children? Of course. We will do the shopping and meet you back here." Willa took Daniel's hand while Emma jumped down from the wagon bed on her own. Inside the general store, Willa worked through the list Zachary had given her while the children explored the displays of penny candy and fascinating merchandise. She was examining a bolt of blue fabric, thinking it would make a nice dress for Emma, when a male voice spoke behind her. "Miss Newman, what a pleasure to see you again." She turned to find a young man of perhaps 25, with sandy hair and an earnest expression. It took her a moment to place him as one of the men who had spoken to her after church several weeks ago. "Mr. Patterson, is it not?" "Please call me William," he smiled, revealing slightly crooked teeth. "I am actually the schoolmaster here in Willow Creek. My aunt is the minister's wife, which causes no end of confusion." "How interesting. I assisted a schoolmaster in St. Louis before coming here." "Did you?" His face brightened. "Then perhaps you would be interested in visiting my school sometime. I would love to hear about the teaching methods they use in the city. We are quite isolated here, and I worry I am not providing the children with the best education." Before Willa could respond, Emma appeared at her elbow. "Papa says we are not supposed to talk to strangers." "Mr. Patterson is not a stranger, Emma. He is the schoolmaster." Willa placed a gentle hand on the girl's shoulder, and we were just having a polite conversation. "It looked like he was trying to court you," Emma said bluntly. William's face flushed red. "I was not. That is, I merely wanted to discuss education." "Of course you were." Willa gave Emma a quelling look. "Emma, why do you not take Daniel to look at the penny candy while I finish the shopping?" After the children moved away, William cleared his throat. "I apologize if I was too forward, Miss Newman. I merely hoped we might become friends, given our shared interest in teaching. I meant no disrespect to Mr. Armstrong." "There is no disrespect to worry about, Mr. Patterson. I am the children's nanny, nothing more." She said it firmly, as much to convince herself as him. Of course. But something in his expression suggested he did not quite believe her. When she emerged from the store with her purchases, she found Zachary waiting by the wagon, his expression thunderous. Emma and Daniel were already in the back, looking uncomfortable. "Is something wrong?" Willa asked as Zachary took the packages from her arms with more force than necessary. "I heard you were having quite the conversation with William Patterson." He loaded the supplies into the wagon, not meeting her eyes. He was asking about teaching methods. It was a perfectly innocent conversation. Willa felt her own temper rising. "Unless you have some objection to me speaking with the local schoolmaster." "I have no objection to anything you do, Miss Newman. You are a free woman, and if you wish to encourage young men, that is your business." "Encourage?" Willa's voice rose slightly. "I was discussing education, not batting my eyelashes and trying to snare a husband. Keep your voice down." Zachary glanced around at the people beginning to stare. "Get in the wagon. We are leaving." The ride home was conducted in tense silence, broken only by Daniel's occasional attempts at conversation, which neither adult encouraged. Willa sat ramrod straight on the bench, her hands folded in her lap, seething with anger and confusion. What right did Zachary have to police her conversations? She had done nothing wrong. When they arrived at the ranch, Zachary unloaded the supplies with jerky movements while Willa took the children inside and tried to act as if everything was normal. But Emma was too perceptive, and at bedtime she asked, "Are you and Papa fighting?" "Adults sometimes disagree, Emma. It does not mean anything serious." Willa smoothed the quilt over the girl's bed. "Do not worry about it. Are you going to leave like the other nannies?" Emma's voice was small, and her eyes held a vulnerability Willa had not seen before. "No, sweetheart. I am not leaving." Willa sat on the edge of the bed and took Emma's hand. "Your father and I had a disagreement, but that happens sometimes. It does not change anything." "Good." Emma squeezed her hand. "I like you being here. You are different from the others. You are not scared of the ranch, and you do not act like we are a burden. And you make Papa smile sometimes, which he has not done much since Mama died." The simple statement made Willa's throat tighten. "I like being here too. Now, close your eyes and get some sleep." After the children were settled, Willa went downstairs, intending to go straight to her room. But Zachary was waiting at the bottom of the stairs, his expression troubled. "Miss Newman, I owe you an apology." She crossed her arms. "Yes, you do. I had no right to speak to you that way, or to imply you were behaving inappropriately." He ran a hand through his hair, making it stand on end. "My only excuse is that I saw you smiling at Patterson, and I felt something I had no business feeling." "And what was that?" Her heart was suddenly beating very fast. "Jealousy." The word came out rough, almost unwilling. "I was jealous that he was making you smile, that he could speak to you freely without the complications of our situation, and I took that out on you, which was wrong." Willa stared at him, her anger draining away and being replaced by something far more dangerous. "Mr. Armstrong." "Zachary." He took a step closer. "When it is just us, could you please call me Zachary? I am tired of the distance between us, Willa. These past weeks, watching you with my children, seeing you make this house a home again, I have felt things I thought died with Grace. And I know it is too soon, and I know you are the nanny and I am your employer, and there are 1,000 reasons this is a terrible idea, but I cannot stop thinking about you." Her breath caught. "I think about you too, more than I should. Then I am not alone in this madness." He reached out tentatively, his fingers brushing her cheek with such gentleness it made her want to cry. "No." She leaned into his touch without meaning to. "You are not alone." For a long moment they stood there, the air between them charged with possibility. Then Zachary dropped his hand and stepped back. "But we should not act on this. The children have to come first. They are just beginning to heal, just starting to accept you as part of the household. If we were to pursue this and it did not work, they would be devastated." "You are right." Willa wrapped her arms around herself, already missing his touch. "The children's well-being must be our priority. But knowing that does not make this any easier." His eyes held hers, and she saw the same longing she felt reflected in their depths. "Good night, Willa." "Good night, Zachary." She watched him walk away toward his own room, and then climbed the stairs to hers, her mind spinning. Everything had changed with that conversation, even as they had agreed nothing could happen. The awareness between them would be impossible to ignore now. The following days were a special kind of torture. Every accidental touch, every shared glance, every moment of working together to care for the children carried an undercurrent of tension that left Willa exhausted. Zachary was unfailingly polite and proper, never crossing any boundaries, but she could feel his eyes on her, could sense the wanting in him that matched her own. The children, thankfully, seemed oblivious. Emma was blossoming under Willa's care, her nightmares becoming less frequent. She had begun to laugh more, to seek Willa out for comfort when she was upset, to share the little secrets and dreams that children hold precious. Daniel was as affectionate as ever, though his constant energy sometimes left Willa wondering how one small boy could be in 3 places at once. One afternoon, while the children were supposedly napping, Willa was in the kitchen preparing a pie when she heard the thunder of hooves and male voices shouting. She rushed to the window and saw several riders approaching the house at speed, with Zachary and 2 ranch hands riding out to meet them. Mrs. Henderson appeared from the parlor, her face pale. "That is Tom Griffin and his boys. There has been bad blood between them and Mr. Armstrong for years." "What kind of bad blood?" Willa watched the 2 groups meet about 50 yards from the house, close enough that she could see the angry gestures but not hear the words. "Griffin claims Mr. Armstrong's cattle have been grazing on his land, eating grass that belongs to his herd. Mr. Armstrong says Griffin has been cutting our fences to make it look like the cattle wandered. It has been escalating for months. As they watched, one of Griffin's sons made an aggressive move toward Zachary, and one of the ranch hands intervened. For a moment, it looked like violence might erupt, but then Zachary held up his hands in a placating gesture and began speaking calmly. Whatever he said seemed to diffuse the immediate tension, though Griffin and his boys rode off with clear reluctance. When Zachary returned to the house an hour later, his face was set in grim lines. Willa met him at the door with a cup of coffee, which he accepted gratefully. Griffin is claiming 20 of my cattle broke through his fence and trampled his north pasture. He sank into a chair at the kitchen table. He wants compensation for the damages, or he says he will take it out of my hide. Did your cattle damage his pasture? I do not know. Maybe. But if they did, it was because someone cut the fence to let them through, and I strongly suspect it was Griffin's boys trying to create an excuse to demand money. He rubbed his face tiredly. This territory is not fully settled yet, Willa. There are no real laws, no real authority to appeal to. Disputes like this can turn violent quickly. Fear curled in Willa's stomach. What will you do? I am going to ride over tomorrow with a couple of the hands and inspect the damage. If it looks legitimate, I will pay what is fair. If it looks like sabotage, I will tell Griffin to go to hell and hope he does not decide to settle this with guns. He looked up at her, and something in his expression softened. But do not worry. I have dealt with men like Griffin before. He is all bluster, mostly. Mostly is not entirely reassuring. I will be fine, I promise. He reached out and took her hand, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. But I appreciate your concern. The touch sent warmth spreading through her entire body, and she had to resist the urge to thread her fingers through his. Instead, she gently withdrew her hand, though it cost her. The children need their father, Zachary. Please be careful. I will, for them and for you. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. That night, Willa lay awake long after the house fell silent, staring at the ceiling and worrying. She had grown to care for this family far more than was wise. The thought of Zachary riding into potential danger made her stomach churn with anxiety. And underneath, that worry was a deeper fear, one she barely wanted to acknowledge. She was falling in love with him, despite all her resolutions to maintain professional distance. The next morning, she woke early to prepare a substantial breakfast for Zachary and the 2 ranch hands who would accompany him. While she cooked, Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in her nightgown. "Papa is going to see Mr. Griffin today," she said without preamble. "Mr. Griffin is mean. Your father can handle himself, Emma." Willa cracked eggs into a bowl, trying to project confidence she did not entirely feel. "He is taking 2 of the hands with him. When Mama was alive, she always went with him to talk to Mr. Griffin. She said she was the only one who could keep Papa from losing his temper." Emma climbed onto a stool at the work table. "Do you think I should go?" "Absolutely not. This is business for adults." Willa began beating the eggs vigorously. "Besides, your lessons are not going to complete themselves." "I do not want anything to happen to Papa." Emma's voice was small. "I cannot lose him too." Willa set down the bowl and went to the girl, pulling her into a tight embrace. "Nothing is going to happen to your father. He is smart and careful, and he is taking precautions. But I understand why you are worried. It is scary when people we love might be in danger." Emma hugged her back fiercely. "I am glad you are here, Miss Willa. You make things feel less scary." When Zachary came down for breakfast, his expression eased slightly at seeing Willa and Emma together. Over the meal, he explained his plan to the children in simple terms, reassuring them without diminishing their concerns. Then he stood, grabbed his hat, and headed for the door. Willa followed him outside onto the porch. "Zachary, wait," he turned, his eyes questioning. She wanted to say so many things. That she cared for him. That the thought of him in danger made her chest hurt. That she wished she had the right to demand he stay safe, to kiss him goodbye, to be more than just the nanny watching from the sidelines. But the words stuck in her throat, so instead she said, "Be careful." "I will." He hesitated, then reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "Take care of my children, Willa, always." She stood on the porch and watched him ride away with the two hands, her heart in her throat. The children joined her, one on each side, and she put an arm around each of them. They stood there until the riders disappeared over the rise, and then she shepherded them back inside to begin the day's lessons, trying to act as if nothing was wrong. The hours crawled past. Willa kept the children busy with arithmetic and reading, then let them help her make cookies, then supervised their play in the yard. But all the while, part of her attention was fixed on the road, watching for the riders to return. It was late afternoon when she finally heard hoofbeats. She rushed to the window, relief flooding through her when she saw Zachary riding toward the house, apparently unharmed. The children ran outside and she followed more slowly, trying to calm her racing heart. Zachary dismounted stiffly, and Willa noticed his knuckles were scraped and bruised. He saw her looking and flexed his hand with a grimace. "It is nothing serious. Griffin and I had a difference of opinion about the value of the damages. You hit him." Emma sounded more impressed than concerned. "He hit me first." Zachary ruffled his daughter's hair. "But we eventually reached an agreement. I am paying him for half the damage, and he is fixing his own fence better so cattle cannot get through. Neither of us is happy, which probably means it is a fair solution." That evening, after the children were in bed, Willa brought bandages and salve to the parlor where Zachary sat reviewing the month's accounts. Without asking permission, she took his hand and began cleaning the scrapes on his knuckles. "You do not need to do this," he said, but he did not pull away. "Be quiet and let me work." She dabbed antiseptic on the wounds, feeling him wince but bearing it stoically. "You should have let the doctor in town look at this. It is just scraped knuckles, Willa." What if Griffin had been armed? What if it had escalated beyond a fistfight? She wrapped the bandage around his hand with more force than necessary. "You have children who need you, Zachary. You cannot take foolish risks." "I was not taking a foolish risk. I was defending my property and my livelihood." But his voice was gentle, and when she looked up, his eyes held warmth. "Were you worried about me?" "Of course I was worried. We all were." She finished securing the bandage but did not release his hand. Emma was frightened. "Daniel kept asking when you were coming home, and I spent the entire day unable to focus on anything except watching the road. I am sorry I scared you." He turned his hand in hers so their fingers were interlaced. "But I am touched that you care. I care far more than I should." The admission slipped out before she could stop it. "Willa." His voice was rough. "If circumstances were different, but they are not different." She pulled her hand away, though it cost her. "The children are what matters." "The children are what matters," he agreed, but the longing in his eyes matched her own. September arrived, bringing cooler temperatures and the beginning of harvest season. The ranch was busy with preparations for winter, and Zachary spent long days working alongside his ranch hands to cut and store hay, check and repair buildings, and ensure the cattle were in good condition before the hard weather arrived. Willa found herself managing more of the household on her own, which she took as a sign of Zachary's trust. One crisp Saturday morning, Zachary announced that the entire household would attend the harvest dance in Willow Creek that evening. The children were thrilled, and even Mrs. Henderson seemed excited about the prospect of socializing. Willa felt a flutter of nervous anticipation that she tried to suppress. She had only one dress suitable for a social event, a deep green cotton with cream-colored lace at the collar and cuffs. It was not fancy, but it fit her well and brought out the color of her eyes. She arranged her honey-brown hair in a simple updo, allowing a few curls to frame her face, and pinched her cheeks to bring color to them. When she came downstairs, she found Zachary waiting in the hall, dressed in clean trousers and a white shirt that made his shoulders look impossibly broad. His eyes widened when he saw her, and he stared for a long moment before remembering to speak. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice rough. "Thank you. You look very handsome yourself." She felt heat rising in her cheeks under his intense gaze. "Papa, are we going or are we going to stand here all night?" Emma appeared from the parlor, wearing her Sunday dress and looking impatient. Daniel was right behind her, his hair slicked down with water. The schoolhouse was already crowded when they arrived, with what seemed like half the territory packed into the modest building. Tables laden with food lined one wall, and a group of musicians was setting up in the corner. Lanterns hung from the ceiling, casting warm light over the assembled crowd. Willa found herself surrounded almost immediately by women eager to hear about life at the Armstrong ranch, while several men shot her interested glances. She answered questions politely, but kept half her attention on Zachary, who was talking with a group of ranchers near the refreshment table. When the music started, William Patterson materialized at her elbow. "Miss Newman, would you do me the honor of this dance?" She could not think of a polite way to refuse, so she allowed him to lead her onto the floor. He was an adequate dancer, if a bit stiff, and he made pleasant conversation about the upcoming school year. But Willa found her eyes straying across the room to where Zachary stood, his jaw tight as he watched them dance. When the song ended, she thanked William and tried to excuse herself, but another young man immediately requested the next dance, and then another after that. She was beginning to feel like a prize at a county fair when a large hand closed gently on her elbow. "Excuse me, gentlemen, but I believe Miss Newman promised this dance to me." Zachary's voice was polite but firm. "I do not recall promising." Willa began, but then saw his expression and realized he was rescuing her. "Oh yes, of course. I apologize, gentlemen." He swept her onto the floor before anyone could protest, pulling her into his arms with a possessiveness that made her pulse race. He held her properly with appropriate distance between them, but his hand was warm and solid at her waist, and his eyes never left hers. "Thank you for the rescue," she said as they moved to the music. "I was beginning to feel overwhelmed. I could not watch another man monopolize you for one more dance." His hand tightened slightly at her waist. "I know I have no right to feel this way, but seeing them touch you, seeing you smile at them, it was driving me to distraction." "I was not smiling at them. I was being polite." She allowed herself to move slightly closer, close enough to smell the soap and leather scent of him. "I would have much rather been dancing with you all along. Willa." Her name was almost a groan. "You are making it very difficult for me to maintain proper boundaries." "Perhaps I do not want you to maintain proper boundaries anymore." The words were bold, but she meant them. "Perhaps I am tired of pretending I do not feel what I feel." "What do you feel?" His voice was low, meant only for her ears. "I feel like I have been waiting my whole life to find you." She met his gaze steadily. "I feel like I am falling in love with you and with your children and with the life we could have together. And I feel like if we do not acknowledge what is between us, I might regret it for the rest of my life." The music ended, but they stood there for a moment longer, the crowd moving around them, lost in each other's eyes. Then Zachary cleared his throat and stepped back, releasing her with obvious reluctance. "I need some air. Will you walk outside with me?" She nodded, and they made their way through the crowd and out into the cool evening. The stars were brilliant overhead, and the prairie stretched away in all directions, silvered by moonlight. They walked in silence until they were a little distance from the schoolhouse, where the noise of the party was muted. "I am in love with you," Zachary said without preamble, turning to face her. "I have been fighting it for weeks, telling myself it was too soon, that it was inappropriate, that I needed to honor Grace's memory. But the truth is, I look for you every morning when I wake up. I find excuses to come into the house during the day just to see you. And at night, I lie awake thinking about how much I want to kiss you." Willa's breath caught. "Then why do you not?" "Because I am afraid." His hands curled into fists at his sides. "I am afraid of what it means if I love you. I am afraid that loving you feels like betraying Grace. I am afraid that if I open my heart again, I will just get hurt. And most of all, I am afraid of how the children will react. Grace is gone, Zachary. Loving me does not diminish what you had with her. Hearts are not finite vessels that can only hold one love." Willa stepped closer, placing her hand over his heart. "And as for the children, I think they will be happy. Emma told me I make things feel less scary. Daniel hugs me good night every evening. They are already accepting me as part of the family. But what if we try this and it does not work? What if you decide ranch life is not what you want? What if I disappoint you somehow and you leave?" His voice was raw with vulnerability. "The children could not bear to lose someone else they love. I could ask you the same questions. What if you decide you do not really love me, that you just needed someone to fill the empty space Grace left? What if you realize I am not strong enough or brave enough to be a rancher's wife?" She moved closer still, until only inches separated them. "Love always involves risk, Zachary. But I think what we could have together is worth that risk." He reached up and cupped her face with both hands, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones. "I do not deserve you. That is not for you to decide." She rose on her tiptoes, bringing her lips close to his. "Kiss me, Zachary Armstrong, or I am going to kiss you. And I know that in 1878 Montana that would be quite scandalous." He laughed, a sound of pure joy she had not heard from him before. And then he kissed her, his lips warm and gentle and perfect. It was not a passionate kiss, not the kind that swept her away in a storm of sensation. Instead, it was tender and careful, full of promise and hope and the beginning of something precious. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. Zachary rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Willa Newman. I think I have loved you since the day you arrived and stood on my porch looking like you were ready to take on the whole Wild West single-handedly. I love you too, and I am not going anywhere." She kissed him again, quicker this time. "Now, we should probably go back inside before people start talking. Let them talk." But he took her hand and led her back toward the schoolhouse, and Willa felt like her heart might burst with happiness. They slipped back inside to find Emma and Daniel playing with other children near the refreshment table. Emma looked up as they entered, and her eyes immediately went to their joined hands. A smile spread slowly across her face. "Does this mean Miss Willa is going to be our new mama?" she asked, loud enough that several nearby adults turned to stare. Zachary's face flushed, but he did not release Willa's hand. "That is a conversation we need to have as a family, Emma. But yes, if Miss Willa is willing, I intend to ask her to marry me." "I am willing," Willa said, squeezing his hand. Though traditionally, the man is supposed to do the asking first. He turned to face her fully, and the love in his eyes made her weak in the knees. "Willa Newman, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Would you help me raise my children and build a life here on this ranch? Would you take a chance on a broken-hearted widower who is still learning how to live again?" "Yes," she said simply. "To all of it, yes." Daniel let out a whoop of joy and barreled into them, wrapping his arms around both their legs. Emma joined the embrace more sedately, but with equal enthusiasm. And standing there in the crowded schoolhouse, surrounded by the curious and congratulatory stares of the community, Willa felt like she had finally found the place where she belonged. The following morning, over breakfast, they discussed the practical details. Zachary wanted to marry quickly, within the month if possible. Willa had no objections. They agreed that she would move her belongings to the master bedroom after the wedding, that the children would call her whatever they felt comfortable with, and that they would work together to build the life Grace's death had interrupted. "Will you wear Mama's wedding ring?" Emma asked, her face serious. "Or will you have a new one?" It was a loaded question, and Willa chose her words carefully. "Your Mama's ring should stay with your father as a memory of what they had together. I would like my own ring to symbolize the new life we are building." Emma seemed satisfied with this answer. "Mama would have liked you, I think. She always said Papa needed someone who was not afraid of him." "I am not afraid of much," Willa admitted, "though I confess your father's prize bull still concerns me greatly." The wedding was held 3 weeks later in the same schoolhouse where they had danced, with most of the community in attendance. Willa wore a new dress made from the blue fabric she had admired in the general store, sewn with help from Mrs. Henderson and several women from the church. Emma and Daniel stood up with them, Emma holding a bouquet of late summer wildflowers and Daniel clutching the ring with fierce concentration. Zachary looked impossibly handsome in a new suit, his hair neatly trimmed, his eyes never leaving Willa's face as she walked down the aisle toward him. When she reached his side and placed her hand in his, she felt the rightness of it resonate through her entire being. The minister kept the ceremony brief, and when he pronounced them husband and wife, Zachary kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. The community cheered, the children laughed, and Willa felt like the luckiest woman in Montana territory. The celebration afterward was lively, with food and music and dancing. Willa found herself pulled into conversations with women eager to offer advice about marriage and ranch life, while Zachary was congratulated by every man present. But throughout the afternoon, their eyes kept finding each other across the room, sharing private smiles and unspoken promises. As evening approached, they loaded the sleepy children into the wagon for the ride home. Daniel fell asleep almost immediately, his head in Emma's lap. Emma stayed awake, watching the stars appear, occasionally glancing at her father and Willa with a satisfied expression. At the ranch, Zachary carried Daniel inside while Willa helped Emma upstairs. After both children were tucked in, Willa stood in her new bedroom, suddenly nervous. This was her wedding night, and while she knew the basic facts of what happened between husband and wife, the reality of it was daunting. Zachary entered quietly, closing the door behind him. He had removed his jacket and loosened his tie, and in the lamplight, he looked both familiar and thrillingly unknown. He crossed to where she stood by the window and took her hands in his. "You are trembling," he said softly. "I am nervous," she admitted. "I know that must seem foolish." "It is not foolish. I am nervous too." He raised one of her hands to his lips, kissing her knuckles. "We can take this as slowly as you need, Willa. There is no rush." She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I am not afraid of the physical aspects of marriage, Zachary. I am just afraid of disappointing you. Your first wife was confident and capable and fearless. What if I cannot measure up? You are not competing with Grace." He cupped her face gently, forcing her to meet his eyes. "You are your own person with your own strengths. And I love you exactly as you are. You understand? I am trying to. Then let me help you understand." He kissed her slow and deep, his hands moving to the buttons of her dress. Let me show you how much I love you, how much I desire you, how grateful I am that you agreed to be my wife." What followed was tender and passionate, awkward in moments but beautiful in its honesty. Zachary was patient and gentle, guiding her through the intimacy of marriage with a care that made her love him even more. And when they finally lay tangled together in the aftermath, her head on his chest and his arms around her, Willa felt a contentment she had never known before. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too." His hand stroked through her hair. "Thank you for giving me a second chance at happiness." The following months brought adjustments and challenges as they learned to navigate married life. There were moments of friction, like when Willa wanted to change how the household was run and Zachary struggled to give up control, or when the children tested boundaries to see if Willa's authority was real. But there were far more moments of joy, of shared laughter and quiet contentment and growing intimacy. Winter arrived early and harsh, blanketing the prairie in snow and confining them mostly to the house for weeks at a time. But the forced proximity only strengthened their bonds. Zachary taught Willa to play chess by the fire while the children worked on their lessons. Emma began calling Willa Mama Willa, a compromise that honored both her mothers. Daniel grew an inch and became an enthusiastic helper with the animals, even in the bitter cold. In February, Willa discovered she was pregnant. She told Zachary one evening after the children were asleep, nervous about how he would react. But his face lit up with pure joy, and he picked her up and spun her around the kitchen, laughing. "We are having a baby," he said wonderingly. "Willa, we are having a baby. Are you happy?" She needed to hear him say it. "I am more than happy. I am ecstatic." He set her down carefully, his hands moving to her still flat stomach. "A new life, a symbol of our love. How could I be anything but thrilled?" The children were told the next morning and reacted with predictable enthusiasm. Emma immediately began planning how she would help with the baby, while Daniel wanted to know if it would be a brother or sister and seemed disappointed they could not know yet. The pregnancy progressed normally through the spring and into the summer. As Willa's body changed, Zachary became even more protective, refusing to let her do any heavy work and worrying constantly about her health. She found it both endearing and occasionally irritating, but she understood the fear underneath. He had already lost one wife. The thought of losing another must be terrifying. In late July, on a sweltering afternoon when the heat made even breathing feel like work, Willa's labor began. Zachary immediately sent one of the ranch hands for the doctor in Willow Creek, then paced the house like a caged animal while Mrs. Henderson and Emma attended to Willa. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. There were moments when Willa thought she could not continue, when the pain was too much, and she wanted to give up. But Mrs. Henderson was there with cool cloths and encouraging words, and Emma held her hand and told her she was brave, and the thought of Zachary waiting downstairs gave her strength. Finally, as the sun was setting on the second day, the baby emerged with a lusty cry. "It is a boy," Mrs. Henderson announced, placing the squalling infant on Willa's chest. "A beautiful, healthy boy." Willa looked down at the red, wrinkled face and felt love crash over her like a wave. "He is perfect." Zachary burst into the room moments later, his face haggard with worry, but when he saw Willa holding their son, his expression transformed into wonder. "You are both all right. We are both fine. Come meet your son." She held the baby out, and Zachary took him with shaking hands, cradling him as if he might break. "He is so small," Zachary whispered. "He is perfect." They named him James after Willa's father, and he became the center of the household's universe. Emma and Daniel were devoted older siblings, fighting over who got to hold him or help with his care. Zachary was a hands-on father, changing diapers and walking the floor with a crying baby without complaint. And Willa discovered that being a mother was both harder and more rewarding than she had ever imagined. The years passed in a blur of activity and growth. The ranch prospered under Zachary's careful management, allowing them to expand the herd and improve the buildings. Emma grew into a confident young woman who could rope a steer and recite Shakespeare with equal skill. Daniel became his father's shadow, learning the ranching business from the ground up. And James toddled after his siblings, determined not to be left behind. When James was 3, Willa became pregnant again, this time with a daughter they named Grace, in honor of the woman whose death had brought Willa into their lives. Emma, now 16, was a tremendous help with the new baby, and Zachary handled the second birth with much more calm than the first. One evening in the spring of 1884, when baby Grace was sleeping peacefully in her cradle and James was tucked into bed, Willa and Zachary sat on the front porch watching the sunset paint the prairie in shades of gold and crimson. Emma and Daniel were inside doing their lessons, and for a moment, everything was quiet. "You remember the day you arrived?" Zachary asked, his arm around Willa's shoulders. "You stepped off that stagecoach looking determined and terrified in equal measure." "I was terrified," Willa admitted. "I had no idea what I was walking into, but I knew I needed a fresh start, and Montana represented that for me. You gave me a fresh start, too. You gave all of us one." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "I was so lost after Grace died. I was going through the motions of living but not really alive. You brought light back into this house, into our lives. You did the same for me." She leaned into him, content. "I came here expecting to be a nanny, nothing more, but you made me a mother and a wife. You gave me a family and a purpose. You gave me everything I did not even know I was looking for." "Are you happy, Willa? Truly happy?" She turned to look at him, this man she had fallen in love with against all sense and reason. His face showed every one of his years now, weathered by sun and wind and the challenges of ranch life. But his eyes still held the same warmth and love they had shown on their wedding day, and his smile could still make her heart race. "I am happier than I ever imagined possible," she said honestly. "This life, this family, this love, it is more than I ever dreamed of having. Are you happy?" "Every single day." He kissed her, slow and sweet. "Thank you for taking a chance on us, Willa. Thank you for seeing past a grumpy widower and 2 challenging children to the family we could become. Thank you for giving me the opportunity." She rested her head on his shoulder, watching the stars begin to emerge. "I love you, Zachary Armstrong. I love you too, Willa Armstrong. Today, tomorrow, and forever." Inside the house, they could hear Emma laughing at something Daniel said and baby Grace stirring in her cradle. The prairie stretched away in all directions, vast and wild and beautiful. And Willa knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The years continued to unfold, bringing both joys and sorrows. Mrs. Henderson passed away peacefully in her sleep when James was 7, and the family mourned the loss of the woman who had been there from the beginning. Emma married a neighboring rancher's son in a beautiful ceremony on the AA, and Zachary walked her down the aisle with tears streaming openly down his face. Daniel took over more of the ranch management as Zachary's back began troubling him, proving himself every bit as capable as his father. Willa and Zachary grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. They weathered droughts and harsh winters, economic downturns and personal losses. But through it all, they had each other and the family they had built together. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Zachary surprised Willa by taking her back to Willow Creek for a dance at the schoolhouse, just like the one where he had first kissed her. They were older now, their bodies not as spry, but they moved across the floor with the ease of long practice, perfectly in sync. 20 years, Willa said wonderingly. How did that happen, one day at a time? He spun her gently. The best 20 years of my life. Mine too. She smiled up at him. Do you remember what I told you that night? That I was falling in love with you? I remember everything about that night. The way you looked in that green dress. The way my heart hammered when I kissed you. The way I knew, absolutely knew, that you were the one who would help me live again. He pulled her closer. You saved me, Willa. You saved all of us. We saved each other, she corrected. That is what love does. It transforms us, heals us, makes us better than we were alone. As they danced, surrounded by friends and neighbors, some who had been at their wedding and some who had come along later, Willa reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She had arrived in Montana as a heartbroken young woman seeking escape from her past, and she had found so much more than she had hoped for. She had found purpose, family, belonging. She had found love in its truest, deepest form. She had come as a nanny, uncertain and afraid, to care for 2 grieving children. But Zachary Armstrong had made her the mother his children needed, giving her a role that fulfilled her in ways she had never anticipated. And he had made her the wife he wanted, loving her with a devotion that never wavered, building a partnership based on mutual respect and genuine affection. The dance ended, but they stood there for a moment longer, lost in each other's eyes, the way they had that first night. Then Zachary took her hand and led her outside to look at the stars over the Montana prairie. Thank you, he said quietly, for everything, for loving me, for loving my children, for building this life with me, for being brave enough to take a chance on a broken family in the middle of nowhere. It was not brave, Willa said. It was inevitable. You are my home, Zachary. You and the children and this wild, beautiful place. This is where I was always meant to be. He kissed her under the stars, the same stars that had watched over them for 20 years, and Willa knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it together. They had built something strong and true, a love that had weathered every storm and emerged stronger for it. Years later, when they were old and gray, sitting on the porch and watching their grandchildren play in the yard, Zachary would take her hand and say, "Best decision I ever made, hiring you as a nanny." And Willa would laugh and reply, "Best decision I ever made, answering that advertisement." Because it was true. She had come to Montana seeking employment and she had found everything. She had found home.